get started, I'd love to kick off. We're going to talk about launching a new product or launching into a new market. And as discussed earlier today, we're getting more granular, more tactical, more execution-oriented. Sam or Nick, can we go to the poll on launching a new product or market, if we have it? So I'd love to get folks' feedback. You can go to Slido, go to your polls tab. Would love to get a sense of who is launching a new product or entering into a new market.
That's a lot. Great.
This year.
That's a lot.
Great. All right, so we'll come back to that, but it looks like those that have answered, the majority are launching into a new market or launching a new product this year. So hopefully we'll get as many of your questions answered as possible. So as we get into this discussion, we've talked about this already. The challenge of getting through to your distributor is difficult on a good day. It gets even harder when you launch a new product or launch into a new market. Setting off a relationship where there is no proven history makes life more challenging for everybody. There's inherent risks. It's like dating somebody that you don't know their background story on, right? So what can you do to start to set the wheels in motion to evoke confidence from your distributor that this new product or you as a new partner in a new market is going to deliver the results and help support their business in the ways that they expect? Additionally, we've got to recognize this is not a conversation. None of these guys are going to come to you and tell you you got to have $1 million plus budget, right? We know from earlier today that this audience is mostly small suppliers. So the comments that you're going to hear today are specifically catered to solutions that would fit the needs of a smaller supplier and would fit the expectations of what a distributor would want from a smaller supplier. And then lastly, what I want to hit on is Falana and Jeff, from a distributor standpoint, as well as our other speakers this morning, have talked about how to make the distributor's life easier, right? We all have our own needs, so how do we transition and think about what is going to make their life easier? So a lot of today's discussion is going to be about that. So let's take one quick look. Let's see where we are on that poll, if you don't mind, and then we'll go back to intros. Great. Yeah, so 82% of those that have answered are launching a new product or entering into a new market this year. So with that, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. First, Mike Deloche, owner and president of MD Wine Industry Consulting. This guy really, let me just say, you have it all, but I think all these guys kind of have it all. There's this really cool blend of creative and executional know-how that's sitting on the stage right now, which is really sort of the cross-section that is so critical in getting a new product right. So I'm really pleased to have Mike here today. He has a tremendous background in creative advertising marketing as an exec in that industry, having worked on the agency side and inside brands. He ran Deloche, also worked at ran Hook and Ladder, but he also has a pragmatism of sales and what really works in market, what really works when the rubber meets the road and you're in market and have to execute. Chris Denny is the founder and president of The Engine is Red, a Santa Rosa and Minneapolis-based creative agency. And Chris has worked with numerous brands in this industry and otherwise, and understands, he works with brands of your size all the time that are challenged with that question of, I don't have $1 million, multi-million-dollar brand budget. How do I get my message out in a way that's creative and differentiated? And then how do I bring it to life in a cohesive way across those touch points in market with trade, distributor, and consumer? So thanks for being here. And then Eric Wera is...
I just did a boomerang.
Oh, cool.
On Instagram story.
Of course, the galactic viceroy of wine would just do a boomerang on stage.
Thanks. You just got me about 1,000 new likes right there. Thank you.
So Eric Wera is the galactic viceroy of wine for Reserve Tastings Wine Company. And this is another guy who has literally done it all. This guy's launched over 500 wine brands. He has done it for branded products. He has done it for private label. He knows more about the luxury wine business than anybody I know, and I've gleaned some pretty valuable advice from him in my short time of knowing him. He worked for Terravant, managing private label, was running he was acting as chief of sales and marketing for them. He is also a public speaker, so I warn you, we put him by design after lunch because he's going to probably spice things up a little bit. And he might stand and walk around the audience. So, just kidding. So that said, I want to jump into our discussion for today. These guys actually prepared 3 sort of best practice tips that they want to share with you to kick things off. I'll let you guys sort of arm wrestle for who's going to do that. But they also did a little extra bit of homework for you guys in putting together a checklist, a new product checklist that is actually an insert in your binder, in your workbook. So that's a takeaway for you guys as you go back to your markets and start development and launch. So we're gonna let Mike kick off and share his 3 tips. We'll go down the line and we've got a whole slew of questions to ask you guys.
All right, thanks everybody for being here. So these are my top 3. We kind of did a top, 50 list, and we whittled it down to like a top 10 list. I think you're getting a total of 9 from us is probably what we're going to do. So I'll take the first 3, and I cannot emphasize the first one enough. It's research, and you may be thinking, well, I'm not Gallo or Constellation or any of these large companies. I don't have a big staff of people who do research. Well, as it says on there, you've got Google and a phone. And really, if you don't have any relationships in a market, find somebody who does. And the only way you can do that is through research. But the most important thing about your research is find out, given your product, who will you be selling to? And I like to take an ant's eye view, street level view of who are my ultimate customers going to be, where do they shop, where do they dine, and to get online and try to find out who those guys are. And once I do that, then I can do things like I can call them up and say, do you have a recommendation for a distributor for my wine specifically? So it's very granular, it's very specific. These are things they're actionable that you can do. And the biggest part to get over is the fear of like doing that and finding out if your product is maybe you'll make an adjustment in your product after you do some of this research. Hopefully, I think many of us have had the experience of creating something without really thinking about how am I going to sell this. I think we've all been there. So when I did Hook and Ladder with my family, we did extensive research. And we were able, with the help of a network of 4 brokers, to build that from 3,000 cases to 25,000 cases in a 4-year period. And so you can do it. I mean, we didn't have a lot of resources. We did it out of our back pocket. We did it. We didn't take out a big bank loan or anything. We had to do it that way. So it can be done, but you have to do your homework. And this research part is probably if you don't want to do it, hire somebody to do it. Get someone who has the contacts, do that. And here's the other part. There's cost of goods sold. They're called COGS. The S is the sales part of it. That's how much is it going to cost to sell this. And I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with that never even contemplated that sales would cost anything. It's just going to happen. My wine's great. It's at a great price. I'm a great guy. People are just gonna beat a path to my door. It's not the 80s anymore. That happened a lot in the 80s. You just had to be there. You couldn't make wine fast enough in the 80s. It was crazy. Those days are long gone. So you think about what you need to invest in your sales. And one of my partners that I work with, Susie Selby, she likes to say that she's a George Washington business graduate. She just spoke at their alumni, or not their alumni. She spoke at their, what do you call it when you graduate, when you matriculate? Commencement. Thank you. Thanks. I love this guy.
Such a team.
And what she says is, you got to expect to go 5 to 7 years before you really start turning some kind of reasonable profit. You're going to be investing all those years in building your brand if you do it right. But you have to have a plan. And you have to plan for spending. Okay, you probably have a number in your head per case of what you might need to spend, right? I want you to multiply that number by 4, and we're not even in the ballpark. So it's in your, it's not that bad. Just trying to break it to you easy. If you look in your packet, it has a kind of a pro forma. It's not one size fits all, but you can take a look at that and maybe we can have some questions later about that. But it never goes away. You'll always have that S in COGS. You will always have the sales cost. Never goes away. Then the third one, and where I've always found success, is by starting in warm markets. Now, you've heard people up here and they spoke about a 50-state strategy. That's not even something we should be contemplating. Most of the people, the 82% of the people in this room who are small and launching a new brand or a new product or a new market. You start in the markets you know. I have another partner that I work with, Peter Miriam, who's here, and he does really well where he's from. Does that make sense? So if you're from a state or you know a lot of people in a state, that's where you start. You start there. Where does your family live? Where are you from? Where do you know people? That's where you go first. Those should be the markets you like to go to. Don't choose Alaska if you don't like cold, and never choose Hawaii because you'll never make any money. So don't do that. You'll never sell enough. So be judicious. You only need to start with one. Your footprint might expand to 3 to 5 in a couple of years because it takes a while to establish these distributor relationships. Certainly that's been driven home today by all the speakers on this stage. It's all about relationships, and it takes time to establish these relationships. And I can't emphasize it enough. If you don't have the relationships, you can get someone who has the relationships to help you. And that's what we did. So I think that covers it for me.
Great. Thank you. Chris, why don't you take it from here?
Yeah, I'll dive in. So my background is I tend to get to come in at the fun part. As you're approaching commercialization, you've done a lot of the back end work. We get to come in and really help with that. So one of the big things we focus on with our brands is sometimes what it takes to produce great wine is the exact opposite of what it takes to sell great wine. You're so focused on building your product and sourcing your craft and beyond that it's tempting to tell that story or to try to get your distributor to tell that story or to use that as marketing. But as 82% of this room may see, it's not a terribly unique story. So the fact that you made a product is really not a brand story in and of itself at all. It won't resonate with press. It probably won't resonate with your distributors. Distributors, particularly on the rep side, have very little time with their accounts. And if they have a few things that they could talk about, make yours the most fun one to talk about. Make something interesting, whether I prefer it to be true as a story, but not necessary. But yeah, whether it's your origin, whether it's your approach, whether it's a technique, whether it's your family, whether it's your passion, you have to tie a different story to the product besides the product itself. And be thinking as you're sitting shoulder to shoulder with, you're going to be competing with each other in this market relatively quickly. What can you say that nobody else can, and what might be interesting? Secondly, get hyper-focused, and I want to piggyback on your research piece. The better focused you are on either the accounts that you want or the audience you want will not just make your initial sales better, it makes it easier for the distributor to win. So for instance, we work with an independent Pinot producer, completely bootstrapped. It's a couple of brothers. I unfortunately can't share all the names up here, but they are hustling. They're doing everything they can. They found in their second year release that 2 craft brew kind of gastropubs were their highest selling accounts in 2 different cities. So they got in the car and they drove and they found out that culturally this price point and style of their brand does really well with brew pubs and gastropubs. So they've decided that that's their anchor strategy. So anytime they're going with the rep, they have gone to Yelp and Google. They have pulled all the gastropubs they think. They'll call them ahead of time. They'll be there because they're not trying to win on-premise in LA. They're trying to win gastropubs in South LA. And being able to have that focus takes a really big challenge into a really simple to-do list. And then it helps their distributor know every time that rep walks into a brew house, I know which one I pull. This is the story I tell. So don't just think about regions as states or as on-premise as independents, but really who do you win at? Why is that? And then how do you partner with your reps to really own that? And then lastly, We find that distributors like to win, reps like to hit their numbers. So don't just come to them with an idea or access to a product. Their entire portfolio has that. Bring a winning plan. Show them that you're all in. Show them, I know we talk about omni-channel a lot, and that can seem intimidating to a young producer or a smaller independent, but show them what you're gonna do, whether that's in social or digital, and it doesn't have to be scary. Sometimes, here's like a little secret trick that we use sometimes. If we know that one of our reps is gonna go into a key account, we will do an Instagram campaign for a week ahead of time in the 1 kilometer around that office. It costs about $30, but it means the buyer has seen your brand a few dozen times before the rep walks in, and it looks like a nationwide campaign.
Brilliant. It's brilliant.
It works. And then once you win the account, do 1 kilometer across all 12 of their locations for $300. But yeah, so come to your distributor with a plan. It doesn't have to be perfect, but show them that you're not just there to supply product, but you have ideas, you have budget, you have push to help them win that. And get them caught in on the whole piece of it, and they'll invest with you. But yeah.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. So I live in Napa now, but I was fortunate to live in Healdsburg, and I'm more Sonoma than I am Napa, I would imagine, in terms of the time that I spent in the industry. And I gotta just tell you, it's pretty cool to be up here with one of the Sonoma royalties in Deloche. So I think that's pretty neat that I got a chance to hang here with Mike. Yeah. So a couple of things. I think one of the reasons they have me on the panel today is because I've managed a lot of really amazing brands, and with people in the room here, like Mum Napa, for example, one of the greatest, most iconic sparkling wines, I think, in the world. But I took a little job. I guess, I don't know if you want to call it the dark side if you manage brands, but I launched one of the largest private label wineries in the country, Terravant. I started there when it was 7,000 cases, and when I left, it was close to 500,000, and I launched close to 500 brands, and that's a fact. And they could be a couple pallets to 30, 40,000 cases for Kroger. So I got a front line seat, and I came out of marketing, but then I started managing sales, and I had to go to a lot of the meetings. And I've been in Cincinnati in 20-degree weather selling to Alan Cook at Kroger, and I've also been to the Hawaiian Islands, and we had a very successful brand, probably one of the few, with Foodland, and mostly because of Falana, who's in the room when she managed the Hawaiian Islands at that time. So I've had an opportunity to manage a lot of really great brands, from small little Napa wineries to huge properties like Kendall Jackson I was a part of for quite some time and in my career. And these three things are the things that I saw that came up probably the most when we either launched new brands, and when I thought about this, it was also new like packaging. You know, packaging, though it's not a new brand, but when we redid the packaging at KJ or Mum, it's a huge thing. I mean, you got to roll it out. You might add an item to it, but it's still a new kind of thing you're introducing to the world, and I felt like they had similarities to them. So number one was get internal buy-in. And I think that's pretty important. I know this kind of goes without saying, but us marketing people, and I'm going to put my marketing hat on, think we know everything, right? We absolutely know what a brand should look like, what it should taste like, what it should, what's the name, and then we go sell it to the world. And since we've had a lot of people here that I've worked with and for me in the industry, we're pretty sure in our minds. You guys know brand marketing people, right? We're cut from a special mold, and I mean special. So when you go pitch it to people, you're very disappointed when you get feedback and you don't get the internal buy-in. You're like, no, this will work. It's got to be a blue bottle that explodes on impact and in fire, you know, underwater barbecue, the whole thing, right? And you get very disappointed. And so to get internal buy-in, not just internally from an executive team standpoint, but also from a distributor or broker if you're with a smaller brand, to go out to the broker and distributor network and ask them questions about, I'm thinking about doing this, and launching it at a wholesale price, launching it at $100 a bottle, for example, with one of the wineries I was just with. Of course, everybody says, no, you gotta do 80, right? Expect that. But to get buy-in, not only internally, but internally in your own group. Everybody's gotta be shaking their head like this when you launch the brand, everybody. Secondly is the wholesale expectations, and I mean this with all the love in my heart. When you go to wholesale, they're very busy, they got a lot of brands, it's very consolidated at this point, so expect pushback. And one of the things I would probably say on the larger brand side, that was the biggest issue, was that expectations were set very high. And when we were with big companies, or when cash is king in a winery, which, 90% of the wineries cash is king, we have to It's not the most, it's not the cheapest and the easiest product to make in the world. So you always kind of, you can launch at 20,000 cases, but to some brands that's not successful because they wanted 50 or 30. And 20 is a pretty amazing number. I've had that happen, or 20 or 2, whatever it is. So make sure that the expectations are conservative and they're set properly, like Mike did with Hook. 2 paths to choose from: what's in your control and what's not in your control. Can't tell you how many places that I've been in that we spin our wheels talking about things that have nothing to do with us. Kroger's got to take this brand, 15,000 cases. Well, maybe Kroger won't take the brand for whatever reason. Or maybe Harris Teeter will pass on it, or ABC Liquor in Florida. You can't hang your, or I'll give you a better example. Scores for a large winery. You go out with a new wine, a luxury winery. You go out with a new wine and you're hanging your hat on a 95 to and above. And I was just with a winery that a 98 and below would be a failure. So you can't control what the score is going to be. You can't control who's actually going to buy it. So you focus on the wine, the packaging, the people, the distribution network. And at the end of the day, that will absolutely win every time. And if something happens where you get that score, or Kroger picks it up, or someone local, then it just adds that up much more to it. So those are the 3 things that I noticed.
Great. Thank you, guys. It's hugely helpful. I saw people snapping pictures, lots of really actionable insights here. I want to get into really brass tacks for a minute, and we'll sort of jump out a little bit. But one of the questions that's getting a lot of traction here, if we can pop up the Slido, if you don't mind, Nick, thank you. Is there a best guideline on GP per case brand expense as a percent of GP, or brand expense per case that we should be spending?
I'll take a stab at that. Obviously, there are a lot of variables involved, but in your takeaway, what I put down was for and this is taking the example of let's say you're a 2,500 case winery and you want to get to 5,000 cases so you can be viable, so you can continue on and maybe grow a little bit beyond that, maybe to 10,000, maybe more. Just depends on what your goals and objectives are. So you should figure you're going to spend a minimum of $25 a case. Does it, regardless of how much you make, so it's not a percentage of your GP or anything. It's just a straight spend. It's an investment in your brand. And if you don't include that in your COGS, your cost of goods sold, right? Many of the clients I talk to, they always, that S disappears, right? There's no cost involved. So you got to put that in. And then expect that in your first 3 to 5 years, if you get to the 2,500 to 5,000 case level at moderate price points, you're going to expect to spend 20 to 25%. And then that'll wean down as you build out. So maybe it'll get down to, if you're lucky, 10%. If you're lucky, maybe you can do that if your brand's a big hit.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting the way, obviously he's got a tremendous amount of experience with this, but I would look at it almost 2 ways. When a brand is growing gradually and on that nice hockey stick, then absolutely the first bunch of years it's a higher percentage and then it weans off. I remember a conversation that I had with Jess Jackson. I had the opportunity to work for KJ. I was the brand manager for Vintners Reserve, the flagship 5.2 million cases at the time. And I said to him, when you, back in the, 70s, 80s, when the brand was really taking off, what was, it must have been great. He goes, no, it was really challenging. I said, why? He goes, because his growth expectations were much more than a hockey stick. He said they were like steps. He goes, you know what it's like to make 100,000 cases, or sell 100,000 cases, but you're making 300,000. I mean, his numbers were big because they were really, the brand was taking off. So his GP was way out of whack because he was constantly investing in a brand that was skyrocketing, but the brand was hundreds and hundreds of thousands of cases. So it was just a different perspective. I just thought it was an interesting story. He said we never really caught up until we hit 1 million cases, and then things started to smooth out a little bit. But I just remember him casually mentioning that to me in one meeting. So, yeah, 1 million cases smooth out. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. I got you. It's like hanging out with Aerosmith. What is it like to be in front of an audience? Yeah, I got you.
All right. So there's a few questions now as we go down the list here. As we think about entering a new market or launching a new product, what is the first thing you need to do, right? You guys have started to talk about the sort of the granular checklist of everything you need to do. How baked does the idea or your plan need to be? How much do you need to sort of plan to adjust and incorporate your distributor's input, particularly on a new product, right? So give us a little sense of like those first few conversations, if you would.
Yeah, so with private label, it's a little bit of the cart before the horse. And I don't know how many people here are involved in private label, but you sell it into the retailer, and then, see, we solved the problem for wholesalers at the time, and it was a really brilliant model that we had. We would go to Harris Teeter or ABC or CPK or, gosh, Darden was a big account of ours, and we would sell them a concept and a brand, and then they would commit to a volume, and then we would go to the wholesale partner and say, hey, guess what? It's a 2,000 case rollout, and they love that because you're just basically handing them an outstanding sale. And that's one good way to get in good with a wholesaler, obviously, is you bring what do they say, wine to the table, right? And that's what we did. But when it's a new brand launch and it has nothing to do with private label, let's say it's a branded winery, then I would typically go to them beforehand, if I could. Try to go to them beforehand and say, we're thinking about this. And I've always expected to be a lot of pushback, and that's the truth. We always got pushback. But to go to the table and say, I'm thinking about launching this. What do you think? What do you think? Where can you sell it? And I think the place to go to, and Mike put it the best, was warm markets. Absolutely. I've had brands that were 50-plus states. I don't know what the plus means. I guess international, right? Or 27 states, and you go to the 5, 10, 15 that your rock stars are in, and build your brand based upon their feedback, not the whole 50 states and the knuckleheads and the Dakotas and that kind of stuff. So those are the things, depending on if it's a branded or non-branded brand that we were rolling out.
Yeah, and I would say that it's probably two different conversations as if you already have a relationship with the distributor. If it's a distributor they're already a part of and you're bringing an additional product, I'd bring them in really, really early at product development stage. It's good to have their feedback, and granted, you're going to have lots of input from lots of different areas, but the distributor voice and the market voice is an important one. So you don't have to take it as gospel, but there's some really good insights there. Two, them feeling a part of the process will help them take ownership in the launch when it comes. So if you already have a relationship, I would be talking about why you're developing a product. We're going after a Sauv Blanc consumer. We're targeting this. What do you think? Where do we go? Long before it's in an activation or a sales plan, and then keeping them updated. I think it's slightly different if you're trying to introduce yourself to a distributor and build a relationship. There, I'd encourage you to bring them some momentum. I can see the DTC question coming up. Show them why this is something worth having, that there's some movement here, that there's potential, and cast a vision for your marketing and for your sales support and how you'll bring this to life so that it's something that they can say yes to that's beyond a product. The kitschy thing is, then once you get the yes, you kind of have to take a step back and then redo that plan alongside them. So if you have an existing relationship with them, you're already signed on, I would say exceptionally early to start having that conversation, build it together, get their input early and their feedback often. If it's brand new, you probably have to do a little bit more homework up front to really sell that vision and that momentum. And then once you're in, you kind of have to take a step back and edit it. It would probably be unwise to stick to that original plan. So it sounds a little counterintuitive, but you can't come in with no plan, but you can't really hold to it perfectly either once they're on. Yeah.
Any additions to that? Okay. All right.
Well said.
Nice.
Okay, great. This is really helpful. So I want to talk a little bit about the idea of developing a brand and crafting that brand story. In my world of new product development, you always talk about relevance and uniqueness, right? So is it a product that people care about, but is it something new and different that addresses an opportunity that isn't already captured? And I'd like to hear you guys talk about sort of how you shape that and where you find the spaces to play, and how you break through in those conversations with distributors using sort of those two mechanisms of the story. Let's start with that. I have another question, but let's start with that.
I'll dive in. So just if I'm hearing this right, how do we, in product and brand development, where do we get started?
How do you craft and make sure that you have something that's relevant and something that's unique? And then how do you really sort of zero in on that and communicate it through in selling in the distributor?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So what we focus on is kind of a two-step approach. First, identify the opportunity. Who is the consumer? What is the sales strategy? Where do we fit? Where's our tiny bit of blue ocean where we think that there's some momentum there? Rosé was a great example years ago where you could say like, oh, there's a macro trend heading this way. We can find it. But where's the gap in the market? Where is somebody thirsty? How can you reach them? But then you have to overlay on that who you are. Do you fit that market? What unfair advantages do you have at your disposal, either from production to craft, location, relationship? And it's tough, but only pursue those that are in the center of the Venn diagram. Just because you're exceptionally good at it doesn't mean you'll ever be able to sell it. And just because there's an opportunity in the market doesn't mean you'll be able to deliver on it. You have to keep fighting and searching in all these different places till something meets both of those criteria. And then when you find it, hit the gas hard and go all in at it. So it sounds odd, but start with the consumer. Who's thirsty? Where do you fit? Where on a wine list are you going to stand out? Why would somebody go after you? What's new and interesting? And out of all those opportunities you find, which ones are you better to nail than anybody else in this room? And where is that? And once you find those two things, that becomes the beginning of everything, of the consumer, of the story, of the brand, of the production. But fight hard to find those ideas. Often for clients, we maintain a permanent whiteboard of all these things, trying to figure out what's a fad versus a trend and kind of see. Yeah, what about you guys?
I actually do my best to try to bring them a customer. You hear I talk about that quite a bit. I'm very focused on going to a retail level, relationships that we have, selling in a concept and an idea, and then saying to my wholesale partner, I have a customer for you. So I know it sounds trivial, but that seems to work the best most of the times.
I have just a illustrative story. I remember sitting down with Derek Benham just right after I'd met him, and it was right after he sold Blackstone. And I was like, how did you do that? I really need to know. That was really cool.
And you try to do it again, Derek.
Yeah.
And then he said, sure,
he's
Mark West.
done it a few times, yeah. So how'd you do that? And he said, well, what we did was we found strength in numbers. So we came up with 7 different concepts. They were all over the place. And then what did we do? The one that took off, the one that started the first multi-pallet order they abandoned the rest of the stuff and just followed that rocket. So we did the same thing with Hook and Ladder. When we started out, we had 5 different concepts. Yeah, I had 5 different concepts, and Hook and Ladder was a leftover from Deloach. It was our port label. And we took it out. I took it out and showed it to people, and Richard Driscoll at Winebow hated the label, but they sold the crud out of it. But just so my advice would be, if you can't do 5 different things, at least don't fall in love with your first idea. Don't get stuck to that. You're having a few glasses of wine and you decide you're the intergalactic viceroy of wine.
It's galactic. It's galactic. It's not intergalactic. Just want to make sure.
From the planet Digel 6. So yeah, just keep an open mind and try to take in all the feedback. I know your idea is brilliant, but you have to have, in the advertising business, you had to have 100 ideas before you could get down to like the final 5 or so.
All right, so one thing Mike's saying that I think is really great to hold on to here, because I've been with companies where you have to put together a 60-page presentation and some that it's 1 page and hope for the best. Don't overthink. Do not overthink the process. The one brand that they didn't think was going to take off did. I've sold a brand once to Harris Teeter called Spin the Bottle. Brilliant name. Actually, the bottle spun on the label, and a new buyer bought into it, bought 5,000 cases, and it sat on the floor and didn't move at all. And we didn't do any other brands because I'm like, this is a winner. Hey, I went home spiking the football before I even cross a line. Like, hey, honey, come on, let's just go party. And that thing just sat on the floor as one of my biggest failures. And so that's actually one time where I should have overthought it. But most of the time you shouldn't. And those are the brands that typically do really well.
Yeah, along those lines, we kind of joke in our world that the only market research that's not full of shit is a credit card. So as much research that you can do, but people lie all the time. It just matters which credit card gets rung up and what actually moves. So yeah, even in your case, the buyer said yes, but the guest didn't.
No.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Let's talk a little bit about the transition of products from sort of moving your business from DTC exclusive to the 3-tier channel, and sort of how that works. Is there an opportunity to take products from DTC and bring them into wholesale? How do you make that decision? How do you balance your product offerings and launch or product development across those 2 channels?
I think it's, if you have an established wine club, and if you're growing it fairly rapidly, then you can use that as an asset, and you can take that into your warm markets. Let's say most of your customers are in, pick a city, Dallas, Texas, all right? So you go there and you have a winemaker dinner with, if you don't have distribution there, you have a winemaker dinner with that group of people, and then you drag along your referred distributor to witness the success. I mean, these are the kind of tactical things, the kind of street level things that you have to do. I had a client, couldn't believe it. I had a client, she went to Arizona and did a winemaker dinner with her wine club and did not invite the distributor. What are you doing? So it's just these really simple tactical things, and just keep in mind, don't make it hard for yourself.
I've got a really great example on this one. Does anybody here know Wink or Club W? Right, a couple 100,000 cases. Well, I was with the winery that helped them make a lot of their wine, so I got a front row seat to massive direct-to-consumer virtual negotiation, right? And so they have a brand, if you guys are familiar with it, called Summer Water. It's a brilliant brand, beautiful brand. Sold it 100% direct, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of members. I mean, this place was massive, and they still couldn't make money. But that's a different topic. It was all the online advertising. But you can now find it in Whole Foods. They decided to go 3-tier. And I remember when they told us they were going to do that, I'm like, you guys are nuts. You're not going to be able to get a distributor and a host and a retailer to say, this is a direct brand. Why would they do that? You're going to still sell it direct. Well, they went to them real quick. They went to Whole Foods, Southern California, SOPAC, right? 9 regions in Whole Foods, at least before Amazon. And they went to him and said, we can prove that we have X amount of people in this region that know a ton about Summer Water. Here's the data. And they will come to Whole Foods to find it. We'll stop selling it direct. And they sold it in Young's. I think they distributed through Young's, I think. Excuse me if that wasn't true. And it became a massive brand for Whole Foods. Now it's like, I don't know, 100,000 cases of off-premise.
Wow.
Totally proved me wrong. Absolutely thought it would not work. But they brought the customer to the wholesaler.
Yeah, and I think that's, just to piggyback on you guys, your DTC story and your track record brings the distributor and the buyer 2 different stories. One, you're saying this customer exists, and this is what we know about them, this is who they are from where they live or what they care about. And then 2, there's momentum to say, this caught fire, right? This was, our very first customer in Dallas was in June. By December, we were in 60 households. A year later, we're in 700. There's momentum here. But if you're crossing over from DTC, show that your DTC track record is an asset for the distributor, not a competitor for the retailer, and it'll go. But just worth saying out loud, are you sure? Like, are you sure that you should do that?
I would ask that too.
Unless you're significantly scaling, make
I
sure
agree.
there's no more ways to grow your DTC. Because supporting retail while growing DTC is a massive burden of mind share, people, and money.
Yep.
And I know that we're in a 3-tier conference, so I don't want to hate on it in any way. But for those of us that are aspiring entrepreneurs in here, achieving distribution can feel like an entrepreneurial milestone, but it's not always a smart financial milestone. So there might be other ways to validate your product. But when it is time, there's definitely ways to pivot that well.
Great. So I've two more questions. Any particular tools that are really helpful as part of a new product or new market launch that you'd say?
Money.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, money. Big budgets that don't get cut.
Right.
Yeah.
We said we weren't going to
Yes.
talk about
Sorry.
that.
It's a quick answer.
So any tools that should go in hand when you're sending samples, when you're having that first kickoff that are just sort of table stakes.
Well, work with your distributor to. We're talking about launching with a new
Launching
you got your
with a new
you're gonna be
distributor or
launching.
launching a new product.
Make sure you have a great launch program, at least a 90-day program. You want to do 100% sampling. You want to make sure that everybody's got bottles in their bag that they're going to drag around. You want to incentivize according to the size of distributor. If you're a smaller distributor, maybe you want to do it on all levels. If you're with a large distributor, maybe you just want to do it on the street level. Maybe you can get a restaurant or retailer involved in a program with an incentive. So on that level, on the street level as well. But you need to plan that out with your distributor, and you need to execute it flawlessly. Good luck.
Yeah, one that I would say that is emerging that I think particularly independent producers look over is digital advertising. That sounds like a big budget item, but it's quite the reverse. It's a level playing field for you. You can get the same share of the market as Constellation with a fraction of the cost. So it's an unfair advantage for a small producer, particularly if you're there. If you can't afford an agency to do that, you can learn online relatively quickly. But because you can target so tightly within a certain driving distance of all of your key accounts, within a certain age range. Remember, you picked your market really focused in the beginning, so now you know who you're chasing in terms of age and affinity and beyond. You can do an incredible amount of support and create buzz around your distributor's efforts for hundreds of dollars, not tens of thousands of dollars. But it seems like something that like programmatic ad buying sounds really scary. It's really not. If you've ever bought something on eBay, I personally believe that's more complicated. So yeah, it sounds like an outside thing, particularly for an independent, but your launch strategy should for sure have media involved, and I think long before you get into mass media, digital, if you can win that, you can really go. And the nice thing is you can change it. As you get feedback from your distributor about what's working and what's not, it takes you an afternoon to change it across all of your markets really quickly.
And I would say that offer value with the social media. I agree 100% with these guys, but what I actually did launch a little channel just for fun, like a wine blog. And my fiance is a professional musician, and between the two of us, we have close to 200,000 followers now on our channels. And I didn't know anything. And by the way, it's a great thing to do too, because if you ever have someone to work for you, then you kind of understand what they go through with the ad buys and how to, take a picture from the stage and your storyboards and that kind of stuff. So it is a brilliant thing to do, and you have to focus on it nowadays. And it has to be authentic. That's the number one thing. So the reason that Mindy and I were able to get such a high following is because it's authentic. I'm up there doing, ridiculous things on videos and taking goofy pictures of us. It's not just a product shot. And it's not me just having dinner. It's fun stuff. And of course, Mindy's playing music or backstage or hanging out with a famous person. It's authentic. It's not the same BS we see with a cheese plate. But once in a while, you do want to show that cheese plate to show them that's what's at the winery. But use social media in an authentic way. Yep.
Great. We're almost out of time, but I have one more quick question before we conclude. One or a couple of you guys can take point on this. We talked at the outset about this idea of, all the folks in the room, for the most part, make phenomenal wine, right? They have a really interesting owner-maker story that, follows some sort of fairly normative path. How do you break through in that circumstance where lots of quality being communicated, lots of owner-maker stories being communicated? Any specific examples that come to mind of something that sparked on a brand that you saw launch that, wow, they sort of took a different tact here, enough just to stand out from the crowd?
To try to give a specific brand that worked for a particular reason, I think it's wildly different for all our different wineries here, from a Gary Farrell, which is one of the greatest Russian River brands in the world. What their product launch might look like would be very different than a private label or from Mum Napa or whatever, Kendall Jackson. So I think it's very specific to each brand and the markets that they're talking to. I do find that the ones that work have the most resilience. So staying with it for a long time. The wine business is incredibly difficult, as we all know in this room. And the ones that have the passion and the love from the sales reps, marketing people, production, ownership, up and down the board. When I've worked for companies before that didn't have that feel to it, that didn't have that authenticity to it, I felt that the brands just reflected that. I don't care if it was the coolest brand idea on the planet. But if you're working for someone like a Mike, where it's a family-owned winery at one point, and there's just a there, that love, that passion that we have for this, not just the business side, but that reason that we're here, it's not for the amount of money we make, I promise you that. We could do better in high tech, but it's the authenticity and the passion and love that will always come through in whatever product launch. And then you launch 10 of them, and one of them will work, like Mike said. So, yep.
Yeah, and I would say flex your empathy. Making the wine is about you. Buying the wine is about them. So once you know who you're going after, figure out why they buy wine. And one of the things that I'll warn you on is that we buy wine very weird out here. The way that we make decisions and evaluate what we decide to bring to each other's houses is not what's going on in Nashville. So go meet your people, figure out what's going on. One of the big things that I would encourage you to consider, particularly if you're in kind of mass market retail or grocery, your consumer has almost zero confidence in their palate. They are walking to the aisle that is the color that they like. They're trying to figure out which shelf they can afford, dropping down one, and it's a quick guess of what's the justification for buying this if the person I'm sharing with doesn't like it. So figure out why they're there, and then meet them there. I think probably one of the frustrating things for those of you that are craft here is that you've seen wines that are way worse than yours take off. It's proof that the quality of the wine's not enough. So you take a look, and I don't want to bash anybody here specifically, but there's been a very successful brand out here in Sonoma County that focused in on a certain breed of hipster. And they didn't make good wine. They made a phenomenal Instagram photo shoot. And they knew that's what mattered to them. They sell experiences, and they ship really bad Pinot Noir. But it's working for them. But because they realized the experience is what sold.
Trying to figure out who he's talking about.
You know who I'm talking about.
Never managed that.
Hipster Hill, not one of my clients. But they did it from a business perspective. They did incredible because they realized that what role they played in their customers' lives was not the role of the vintner. And that's a weird delineation. But yeah, once you know who your consumer is, find out why they buy wine and why they don't. And if you answer that, the brand will break out.
Awesome. What a great end. Thank you so much, guys, for a tremendous session.